The Guardian has released what's being referred to as the Uber files, a massive leak. They call them dumps, big dumps, as Trump would say, that reveals a long history of, wouldn't you know, corruption. Not only corruption, lies and illegal maneuvers as well. So let's get into it. What exactly did they uncover through the Uber files? Well, the Guardian obtained these files from Mark McGann, who's a former Uber chief lobbyist. So he knows a thing or two about Uber and some of their lobbying efforts in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And he says, quote, "I regret being part of a group of people which massaged the facts to earn the trust of drivers, of consumers, and of political elites. I should have shown more common sense and pushed harder to stop the craziness." Now remember, he was a lobbyist for Uber in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And so when we think about corporations and the corruption they engage in the context of the United States, that's called Tuesday. Like, it's the most common thing ever. This story barely got any attention in the United States because this is just business as usual in the United States, but it's a problem. And the people who suffer the most from this problem are, of course, those working in competing companies, taxi cab drivers, and also the employees for Uber. So the files, which span from 2013 to 2017, includes more than 83,000 emails, messages, and WhatsApp messages. So let's dive in. What do we know? First, the leaks shed light on Uber's business model. Their whole plan, of course, is to undercut the established taxi and cab industry, to put pressure on governments to essentially rewrite laws to help pave the way for this app-based gig work to just exist in a more friendly environment, okay? So in a bid to quell the fierce backlash against the company and win changes to taxi and labor laws, Uber planned to spend an extraordinary $90 million in 2016 on lobbying and public relations, and that's according to one of the documents. Uber also paid academics. This is very Koch brothers-ish, okay? They paid academics to publish favorable research, which is why whenever people say like, oh, this study said this and that study said that, it's really important to look into who paid for the study, who commissioned the study.
Yeah.
Now, one of the first deals sealed by Uber with top academics was with Professor Alan Kruger, at Princeton University in the United States in 2015. He had been Barack Obama's chief economic advisor and was famous as an authority on raising the legal minimum wage. So he held particular influence when it came to advocating for Uber's impact on employment. And the Uber files reveal for the first time that he was paid about $100,000 for a study that was widely quoted in support of Uber as a creator of good jobs, precisely because it operated outside the rules. Internal Uber emails note that he was helpful with the press. I'm sure he was. John, I remember covering climate denial papers that had been funded by the Koch brothers. And these papers were published by university professors and all of that. So when I saw that element of the story, I immediately thought of you.
Yeah, you definitely see it with climate change. You see it with a lot of nutrition stuff too.
Yes.
Cigarettes and all sorts of stuff like that. This is just one of the tools that they use amongst many. And one of the longstanding things that we're supposed to do here at TYT is make sure that people know about these. I know we're gonna get into a lot of more aspects of them being perfectly willing to expose their drivers, like actively to violence as a technique to win over foreign governments. And we know for a long time that they didn't seem to give a damn about the fact that their own drivers or riders were getting assaulted and or raped. There's a lot of issues with them. And we shouldn't be too surprised by this. I'm actually disappointed myself because if you were to rewind to, I don't know, like 2015 or earlier, I probably would have had a lot of nice things to say about Uber. It seemed like, okay, well, you had this entrenched taxi thing in a lot of cities, which had a lot of its own problems because it had been around for so long. And Uber's coming in doing all this lobbying, but it's not like the taxi companies didn't do that for decades. And so, oh, maybe this is a bit more freeing. Maybe this will allow people to pick up a little bit of extra work. But it's still a corporation. And so, best case scenario, it generates an interesting Hulu documentary a few years later. Like that's what we have to remember. I probably, if you were to flash back to maybe like 2013, I probably would have had nice things to say about Tesla and maybe even Elon Musk. But we have to remind ourselves, these are corporations, they're led by CEOs. Stop calling them visionaries and geniuses. They're rich a-holes. That's what they are, and they want more money. There are no good corporations except maybe Ben and Jerry's. I don't know at this point. Like, can you name another genuinely good corporation or genuinely good CEO? If you can, just wait. Okay, and they will remind you of who they are and who they're serving.
So look, you're making such an important point, and I want to just like, let's just sit here for a moment and like take it in, because what you're saying is right. And I want people to think about what John is saying every time they're lured, they're seduced by the Mark Cubans of the world, right? Because Mark Cuban and his online pharmacy, I see it as the early days of Uber, where I agree with you, John. I also had positive things to say about Uber because we didn't know that what was actually going on was that you have these investors who are heavily subsidizing the cost of those rides, right? To keep the cost down, it'll be a cheap ride that does what? I mean, it becomes a very fierce competitor for taxi cab drivers. And they wanted to monopolize the market. And as soon as they got rid of the competition, they would stop subsidizing the rides and the prices would explode. And that's already happened, by the way. We're seeing how expensive it is to take an Uber, and it's like, But
I've effectively given up like
I don't
3 years ago.
No,
there was a period. And it would almost be acceptable if, okay, they were really screwing over their drivers during the subsidized days when the price was low, and now it's really high and the drivers are still being screwed over. How does that work? You're charging way more and they're still screwed?
The drivers never mattered to Uber. I mean, they've been working on moving toward driverless vehicles from the very beginning because the cost of labor is the #1 expense that these corporations want to minimize or get rid of entirely.
Well, and the damage to their cars, but of course that's offloaded onto the drivers.
That's the other thing, exactly. All the costs have shifted from the corporation to the employees, the drivers. And in this case, the drivers have to provide the car, the drivers have to make the repairs on the car, the gas money, all of that. Okay, but let's put that aside. Let's go back to Mark Cuban real quick. So Mark Cuban's online pharmacy at this moment is offering much lower prices for certain pharmaceutical drugs. But remember, it's not about whether Mark Cuban's a good guy or a bad guy. That doesn't matter. Everything is based on incentives and disincentives. So Mark Cuban's online pharmacy has venture capitalists behind it, okay? Investors, what do investors do? They invest money in these ventures hoping to get a what?
Philanthropic effort going?
A return on investment. A return on investment.
To create a better world?
So guys, it's not that I think I don't know if Mark Cuban's a good guy or bad guy. I don't care. I'm not analyzing people. I'm analyzing systems, okay? So in this case, the system is like the way the system works makes this whole online pharmacy situation very predictable. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. Just a few more things I want to mention. The files also reveal Uber's horrifying response to taxi driver protests across Europe in 2016, including one insane quote from a former Uber CEO, Travis Kalanick. So amid taxi strikes and riots in Paris, Kalanick ordered French executives to retaliate by encouraging Uber drivers to stage a counter protest with mass civil disobedience, warned that doing so risked putting Uber drivers at risk of attacks from extreme right thugs who had infiltrated the taxi protests and were spoiling for a fight. Kalanick appeared to urge his team to press ahead regardless. I think it's worth it, he said. Violence guarantees success. Nah.
Then get out there and put your skull in the path of the fist.
Oh, he would never do that. There's a lot that's been uncovered through these Uber files. We don't have as much time as I wish we did to get into all the details, but I highly recommend you guys read about it. And again, it's not unique to Uber. It's important to understand these files and this investigation reveals what the motivations are for these types of companies. Profit over people, provide a return on investment for your shareholders or for your investors. That is what drives this whole system.
Yeah.
And people's livelihoods, people's well-being, none of that matters. Profit over people, that's the way this works.